This is a sound check. If you can see and hear me, please let us know on chat. And there are only a few students watching right now. So if you can see me and hear me, let us know it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay? Okay, I apologize. We had some technical difficulties. We've been trying to get on the air for approximately an hour. And you students who are watching now are the faithful remnant. So thank you for being faithful. And we are going to pre-record this class also for those who come later. So, let us get right into the book. By the way, my internet has been down for most of the week. My dog chewed through the internet cable. And when my husband tried to repair it, it didn't work. So we think maybe there's something else wrong that happened when the dog was chewing. So I haven't been able to check the email, and I don't know what's happening. So hopefully this will be back online soon. So let us get to the book. Now we are on page 46, and I will reread the paragraph we did last week, and then moving straight into the first paragraph we'll do this week. I had hoped to get at least halfway through the next paragraph as well, but we may run short on time today, so because of a late start. So we'll see. Maybe we can get through it anyway. So I'll begin reading with the paragraph that begins with the phrase, "with what sureness," on page 46. With what sureness Conrad has tackled here in his creative writer's thought the problem, lives and life, that was for Dickens in Little Dorrit at the center of his profoundly deliberated undertaking, that being an inquest into contemporary society. The young captain and the fugitive from justice are, as they have to be, two separate centers of sentience, two identities. But the way in which, while never ceasing to be conscious of the separateness, we are made to think of the fugitive as the captain's double. Quote, "It might very well have been myself who had done that. In a sense, it is myself who has," makes the young Conrad captain for us, in the testing situation, the presence of life, the race, as human responsibility focused in the individual being, one who so patently knows that he does not belong to himself. Moving on to the part we're going to be looking at today. My critical judgment is mine, in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. If I did, it would cease to be a judgment. But it is not merely and possessively mine, my implicit assumption being that it is right. I know that it is not mine, and that my responsibility is to mean it as universally valid. Of course, it has a training behind it, one that has entailed a complexity of necessarily collaborative frequentation, a matter, most importantly, of exercising sensibility and responsive thought on the work of creative writers, such a judgment seems to oneself a judgment of reality, and for arriving at it, there are no rules, though there is active informing principle. Okay, let's start with that much. My critical judgment is mine. The first thought that occurred to me when I read that I was reminded of the context of our discussion. We have just finished reading an extended quote of Levis quoting himself when he's quoting himself commenting on the Conrad story, A Secret Sharer. He is using his commentary of The Secret Sharer. He is using that commentary as an example of the living principle. Now, he has pointed out in his commentary, which we studied a class or two ago, he has pointed out that other critics have understood this passage of Conrad differently. Remember page 45, last sentence. Levis writes, "Some knowing psychological and esoteric subtlety has been written about the double. The significance, however, is not psychological, but moral." So, my first thought when I read the paragraph we are considering now is to remind myself that what precedes this sentence, here we are, my critical judgment is mine, in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. What precedes this, in other words, all of this stuff that came before, is a critical judgment. It's a critical judgment. Okay, let me adjust this a bit. Okay. Now, it is critical in that it is concerning literature. He is functioning as a literary critic, expanding upon the deeper meanings and truths that can be gleaned from a literary work. It is a judgment in that it is his call. It is his opinion. It is what he asserts as a personal opinion. It is not a fact or something that he draws out like a detail of the story, something objective. It is his subjective analysis. And therefore could be right or wrong or partially right. It is subject to argument. Someone could argue against his viewpoint. Okay? So, we understand that vocabulary, my critical judgment. But why does he say, my critical judgment is mine? What's that supposed to mean? My critical judgment is mine in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. Okay, now when he says in the sense, he is introducing the idea that there is more than one way to look at it. So we have critical judgment, and then there will be, in one sense, it is his, and in another sense, it will be something else. More than one way to look at it. It's like saying, on the one hand, it is mine, but on the other hand, it is something else. So, my critical judgment is mine in the sense, actually mine, I think we'll go with both senses. It's mine in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. If I did, it would cease to be a judgment. Think for a moment of what is happening when you make a judgment for yourself. You assert, for example, you might assert that a certain shade of color is the same as another shade of color. You have judged it. It is your judgment. Something very different happens if a third party, another person, comes in and attempts to convince you that this shade is the same as that. And even though you can't see it, you allow yourself to be persuaded. If you are persuaded, it is no longer your judgment. If the other person convinces you, then you have been convinced, and at best you can say that you agree, but you cannot say that it was your judgment. So, in that sense, Levis's judgment about the secret sharer is his own. But not merely and possessively. His own. Merely, I know you will remember, means only this. It is a reduction. So, his critical judgment is not only his because he made the judgment. And it is not possessively his. What I believe Levis is getting at is, and I'm quite sure that what Levis is getting at is, if the critical judgment were merely his and possessively his, it would be more like an opinion or a preference, not so much like a perception of reality. Levis is saying that his critical judgment is not purely arbitrary. But it carries with it a universality. Let us read on. My critical judgment is mine in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. If I did, it would cease to be a judgment. But it is not merely and possessively mine. My implicit assumption being, by the way, the semicolon indicates a very closely linked additional sentence which adds information to the first. The first is, it is not merely and possessively mine. The second is, my implicit assumption is that it is right. Now, he doesn't say my implicit assumption is that it is right. He says my implicit assumption being that it is right. Now, that it still means the same thing, but I'll explain that construction a little bit to you. All right. It is not merely and possessively mine, semicolon. And then one might think, why is that true? And then you go back and say, well, my assumption being, my assumption for this, at the same time I'm asserting this, I want you to realize that my assumption is that I am right. So the construction that says my implicit assumption being refers us right back to here, and it's like a continuous. At the same time as I'm saying this, I think you have to understand that I believe myself to be objectively right. So in a sense, his judgment, critical judgment, may not even be the best word for what he is claiming. He is claiming that he is more perceiving something than generating a judgment. So he is claiming a greater degree of authenticity and correctness to his views than would normally be accorded to a critic's judgment. So let's read on a little more. My implicit assumption being that it is right. Then he brings in that quote again. I know that it is not mine. And if you switch back to page 44, we have Blake saying, though I call them mine, I know they are not mine. This is the assertion that a muse is actually channeling his ideas through us. Some outward reality is speaking through me. So these judgments are actually not mine at all. They are coming from another realm of truth that is outside myself, and I am simply a focal point for the message to come through. This is what Levis judged that Blake meant when he made the original statement, and all good artists follow suit, making the same implicit claim to being channels of something that exists outside of themselves. So when he brings in this quote, he is simply alluding to an idea that has been thoroughly discussed in former paragraphs. So it wouldn't fit the sentence otherwise, because it doesn't fit the flow. Okay, so I know that it is not mine, and that my responsibility is to mean it as universally valid. Okay, now we are picking up again the theme of an artist having a moral duty to speak the truth to the world through his art. The idea was brought forth before that artists create because of a moral duty. On page 45, at the top, second line, one writes out of one's moral sense for the race, as it were. And Levis is claiming that a literary critic, such as himself, has a similar moral obligation and responsibility to tell it like it is. That's an idiom. A literary critic has a moral responsibility to see reality with clarity and then tell it like it is so the world can understand reality. And as you remember, Olavo said that authors write out of love for their neighbor, and out of a desire to meditate on their neighbor and on human nature, and understand the motivations and the emotions and the needs and the difficulties of human beings. And once the author puts that out there, the critic can take it in, process it, and send it right back out for the next reader to understand clearly. And that is what Levis is trying to do. And he is claiming in this paragraph that his viewpoint about the secret sharer has universal validity. Universal validity. It is right. So it has universal validity, and that it is his, Levis's, moral duty and responsibility to clarify this, that he gets out of the secret sharer for the reader, for mankind. Okay, so let's just reread. My critical judgment is mine, in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. By the way, to take over means to push aside the person driving and start driving yourself. Push aside the person who was in charge and assume leadership yourself. So if he were to take over someone else's ability to judge, that would be more along the lines of persuasion as opposed to judgment. But anyway, that's what take over means. My critical judgment is mine, in the sense that I can't take over anyone else's. If I did, it would cease to be a judgment. But it is not merely and possessively mine. My implicit assumption being that it is right, I know that it is not mine. And that my responsibility is to mean it as universally valid. So if he means it, he's writing things, he means for you to take it as universally valid, not simply take it as one interesting take on the secret sharer, equally valid with some others. So he wants you to take it as universally valid. He means it that way. Of course, it has a training behind it, one that has entailed a complexity of necessarily collaborative frequentation, a matter most importantly of exercising sensibility and responsive thought on the work of writers. Okay. This word training that word gave me a lot of trouble when I first started studying this passage several weeks ago. When I spoke to Aula, I asked him over and over why Levis is using the word training. And if you look ahead, the word training comes up again in the next paragraph, in a slightly different context, but very similar. And for some reason, Olavo never really head-on attacked the word training. But he did say some things that I would like to pass on to you as a general context before we tear apart Levis's paragraph. When we were speaking, and this was 3 weeks ago, but when we were speaking, I was concerned that the captain in the secret sharer was acting lawlessly. And he was a law unto himself. Another phrase we use is a loose cannon. These two are both idioms for people who do not submit to authority. They believe they are above the law. And of course, this launched us into the discussion where we got the 3 levels of law, code in the middle, something above the law, something below, which was lawlessness. But once Olavo explained the 3 levels to me and was able to help me to understand what the upper level was like, which at that time we were considering to be the realm of responsibility. I now think of it also as just the living principle, even more broad than just responsibility, but the realm of the living principle. Once I understood that, this concept of training became more in focus. And Olavo said that when a person is immature, young, like a child, then they are under the law in a codified way, and they obey slavishly. But when you are in the realm of the law, I should have left that up. But anyway, when you are in the realm of the law, meaning the code, okay? This is the code. When you are in the realm of the law, You exist around here. But every now and again, a moral dilemma will arise where you will have to think a little bit above the law. You will have to make a little jump into that realm. And for example, Olavo gave me an example. When he was a child, about 6 years old, I think, his parents divorced. And it was very upsetting and traumatic. There was a lot of fighting. And his brother, well, both sons, the children, were asked to take sides. Who is at fault? And the brother sided with, I can't remember, I believe he sided with the mother and hated the father. Olavo, age 6, had to make a jump into the living principle because he had competing values. There was the fact that his father had left, his mother is in need. There were many factors on both sides. But one thing 6-year-old Olavo knew was the commandment says, honor your father and mother. And he knew that if he was to honor his father and mother, he could not be their judge. He was their son, not their judge. And so he determined within himself not to take sides, but to honor both his father and his mother, and to realize that their problems with one another were their problems, and he would honor both. And by doing that, he saved himself a lot of grief and a lot of moral destruction. Now, this challenge to 6-year-old Olavo caused him to make a jump up into the realm of responsibility where you know what you should do. No matter whether your older brother is doing something else. No matter that both of your parents are asking you to do something else, each asking for the support of the children against the other parent. Without respect to any persuading voices, Olavo knew what his responsibility was and determined in his heart to do it. Up here is the realm of responsibility. And the realm of freedom. Because, as I read in literature, there is one thing that a man is always able to do, and that is his duty. He does it by concentrated effort, insistent effort. Up here is the realm of freedom. No one can force you to do other than you have determined within yourself is your duty. Now, I asked Olavo, what is to stop a person from being lawless? And simply saying, whatever I think I should do, I'm going to do. Screw the law. If I want to drive 100 miles an hour, forget the fact that we have a speed limit. If I want to cheat on my taxes, well and good. If I want to take something that doesn't belong to me, well, it's not hurting that store. They have a million of them. You know, what's to stop? If I am the judge, I can make any rule I want. And that's where Olavo brought in the word